Good evening. I'm honored to be invited here, wherever here is nowadays, to talk about the future of museums, especially in memory of our friend Martin-Roth, who did so much to influence the mission and responsibility of museums, who was so dedicated to their role as places to transfer ideas, to educate, to promote liberties, and to stimulate intellectual and moral debate. Obviously, it's a difficult time to talk about the future of anything right now, as so many museums remain closed and others slowly try to reopen under stringent requirements of social spacing and restricted numbers, not to mention the routines of sanitization. It is not easy to speculate how this crisis will affect the way museums will operate in the future. We can at least consider the general tendencies of museums before the COVID-19 pandemic. In this case, we can reflect on a remarkable period since the 1990s, where we have not only seen a proliferation of new museums and extensions, but also a radical change in their popularity and in their mission. We have witnessed museums redefine themselves, not just as repositories of beautiful artifacts, but also as places of education, instruction, and dialogue. During these years, museums have tried to broaden their audience, extend their outreach, and expand their cultural and social significance. Not all of this has been seen as positive, and the growth in visitor numbers also reflects the financial pressures that cultural institutions have been subjected to. The desire to be more relevant comes with costs and puts pressures on facilities and resources. It has also, in some cases, eroded the detached and contemplative atmosphere that is so important to the quality of the museum and has ensured their role as sanctuaries from everyday life. In general terms, museums have aspired to evolve from a specific destination into somewhere to go. In this process, the museum offer has become more complete and appealing, not only through program, but through amenities and activities. This dynamic dimension is perhaps the biggest change in the contemporary museum since its 19th century origins. This desire to open up and to add other facilities and opportunities to both cater for and attract growth in visitor numbers has been the motivation for so much new museum architecture over the last 30 years. One other consideration that cannot be overlooked is the extraordinary shift in the world of contemporary art. Its impact is felt across all sectors of the process, from the content, scope, and ambitions of the artists, the importance of commercial galleries, the soaring value of work itself, and the growth of collectors. All of which has had a profound effect on the role and profile of contemporary art museums in particular, but also generally on all museums and cultural institutions. Contemporary art has given museums an alternative profile to the earnest academic institutions they historically are, turning them into something that belongs to, stimulated by, and reflects contemporary life. What role has architecture played in all of this? There's no doubt that museum architecture has been important, both to the expansion of programming, the desire to make museums more accessible, and importantly, to their profiling and visibility on a global stage. From the position of the architect, the museum commission itself is a very desirable one, as it draws on the fundamentals of architecture: the making of good spaces, the careful consideration of light, the sequence and orientation of spaces, and all of this in collaboration, normally with clients who tend to be encouraging, supportive, and patient to the creative process. Despite these broad trends and changes, it is impossible to really talk now about the future without considering the effects of COVID. Perhaps the most asked question in the architectural community at the moment is how architecture will change as a result of the pandemic. Of course, we don't know what post-COVID means or when it might happen. Either we solve it and then there's no real reason to change, or we don't solve it and all bets are off. Unfortunately, there is no doubt that there will be a big fallout, even if it disappears quickly. Many institutions have closed, will close, and everyone will suffer from economic damage. How do public buildings change if people can no longer meet together or sit near each other? I don't know what this future could look like, and probably it's not worth contemplating yet. Perhaps it's more interesting to consider how the changes that might be forced on us could align with changes that we might have eventually encouraged ourselves to do if they hadn't been forced on us. I think many of us are muttering the same mantra of hope that the pandemic comes with a silver lining and stimulates us to challenge the way we have been behaving up till this point. Strangely, of course, the situation doesn't really provoke those of us who are not from the medical or scientific community to reflect on the nature of the virus itself, but rather to reflect on what it has exposed in the way we normally conduct ourselves, on how the pandemic has emphasized these conditions and without doubt exposed the failings in our social systems, the lack of protection for large underprivileged parts of our society. It has exposed, along with many other things, the issue of extreme and growing social inequality. One of the things that we absolutely know, but we're unwilling to confront, is the contradiction that exists between our absolute commitment to growth and the explicit damage that this has on the environment. This period of suspended animation gave us a practical chance, is giving us a practical chance to reconsider growth as the motivator and justification of everything. The spiral of consumption and leveraging of costs forces us into an inevitable need to sell more, make more, consume more. This flies in direct competition with our need to protect and give more value to our resources and to our environment. Through this period of confinement, we have found a way to discuss and consider the challenges of globalism and growth, not from a solely negative point of view, but in a reconsideration of what we need as opposed to what we want. What is at hand as opposed to what is out of reach? What is the nearest to us seems all of a sudden more enticing. At the same time, it has been an opportune moment to take stock of the environmental and social fallout from excessive tourism. What previously seemed unstoppable has stopped. The center of our cities that have been hollowed out by tourism and retail seem like places that might become ours again. Decisions that we didn't seem possible to make have been made for us. Museums themselves are clearly dependent and reliant on tourism, and they are under pressure to grow for commercial as well as pragmatic reasons. In itself, this cannot be criticized. To improve the way that work is shown, to put more of the collection on display, to increase the quality of the offer to the visitor, to bring more people into confrontation with art, is a concern that should not be dismissed. However, perhaps it is a moment when the spiral that forces every evaluation of museum performance to be based on visitor numbers can be reconsidered. Over the last years, the cultural sector has found it necessary and has been relatively successful in communicating that it is good for the economy. And in doing so, it has become slightly entrapped by this measure. Cultural institutions and activities shouldn't need commercial justification. Of course, every city is happy when culture becomes a major player in its identity and in its economy. Normally, this evaluation is closely based on the tourist economy, and we are starting to understand the effects of tourism are not all good, at least excessive tourism. Looking beyond lucrative business, many cities are now being forced to consider its effects on the quality of life of those who work and live there. With this in mind, museums also have to consider their core priorities, especially in terms of audience. We know, for example, that the visitor demographics of many museums show less than 30% of their visitors are local. In recent years, museums have really stepped up in playing a wider role, maintaining their relevance in a society of conflated values. They have demonstrated their role as social as well as cultural infrastructure in our contemporary society. Moreover, they have often served as a much-needed space to question, discuss openly, and reflect. If, however, I am forced at this moment to make a statement about the future of museum architecture, and I can only consider that museums are going to have to do what we all must do. Make more from what we have, be more flexible and more resourceful. Clearly, they should expand programs of engagement and dialogue. Most importantly, they should leverage their independence and their authority in today's climate. We need it more than ever. From the perspective of architecture, surprisingly, I'm advocating to build less, build lighter, reuse, refit and adapt. Be more innovative with the spaces and buildings you have. Be more rooted in the immediate context and society around you, and expand your visions as far as possible, but take care about enlarging your real estate. Thank you very much.